Hey, welcome back to We Be Kids again. My name's Danny, I'm one of the founders at We Be Kids. I'm an outdoor educator and a storyteller. If it's your first time at We Be Kids, know that there are nearly 200 resources over at the website for you to check out. They're all for free. We put them there to try and help families get out into nature and improve their well-being. Today, I'm going to tell you a story. This story is from a great little book called Dancing with Trees, and it's a collection of folk tales from the British Isles. And this story is called The Laddie Who Herded Hares. It's a little bit of a tongue twister, and there's a few little bits in it that are tongue twisting, so be kind with me if I manage to tie my tongue in a twist. So this story happened on the borders between England and Scotland. And in the borders between England and Scotland, there was a lovely little cottage made out of granite rock. It had a beautiful thatched roof and a really lovely well-kept garden with a well for water. And in the cottage lived a lady and her two sons. Now one day, one of her sons awoke. He went in for his breakfast and he said to his mother, "Mother, the day has come where it's time for me to leave home and make my own way in the world." Now the mother was sad about this, but she knew that this is the way it should be. So she said to her son, "If you head down to the brook and bring me back some water, I will make you a big bannock, and you'll be able to take that on your way, and it will give you something to eat until you get on your feet." So he agreed, and his mother handed him a cracked bowl and a sieve. She said, "Bring as much water back as you can. The more water, the bigger the bannock." So he headed down to the brook, and as he headed down, he looked at the cracked bowl and the sieve. How am I going to collect any water in this? But he got to the brook and he dipped it down, but as he picked it up, all the water ran out. He stood there and he thought for a second, and then just over his right shoulder, a little bird started to sing. And it caught his attention. He looked, and the bird sang to him, and it said, "Line it with moss and clog it with clay. Then you can carry the water away." And the boy looked at the bird. He said, "Who do you think you are telling me what to do? I know how to do this. I don't need your help." And the bird said again, "Line it with moss and clog it with clay, and then you can carry the water away." And the boy chased after the bird. He said, "Get out of here. I don't need your help. Leave me alone." And the bird flew away. And the boy went down to the brook and he filled the pot and he filled the sieve and he set off back to the house. And when he got back to the house, there was a tiny little bit of water in the bowl. His mother said, "Well, it's not much water, but I'll do my best." So she worked hard and she made him a bannock, the tiniest bannock you've ever seen. And she wrapped it up and she gave it him and she gave him a kiss on the forehead and she wished him the best of luck. And off he went. And he walked over hills, he walked across fields, he walked through valleys for hours and hours and hours, and until he became very tired and weary. Then he decided to take a seat. He rested his back up against a big old beech tree and he reached into his pocket and he pulled out his tiny bannock and he began to eat it. And as he began to eat it, he noticed again over his right shoulder the little bird had reappeared. And the little bird said, "Can you give me a crumb of your bannock?" The boy said, "Get out of here." He said, "I've only got a little bannock because of you to begin with. Now shoo." And the little bird said, "If you give me a crumb of your bannock, I'll give you one of my feathers so you can make a pipe." The boy said, "I don't need a pipe. Who am I going to play a pipe to? Get out of here, shoo, shoo." And he shooed the bird off. And the bird disappeared into the distance. And the boy finished his bannock. And he stood up and he set off walking. And he walked to the top of a tall hill, and from the top of the tall hill, he looked down, and down below he could see a great castle where the king lived. He thought, surely I'll get some work there. So he ran down the hill as quick as he could, and he arrived at the castle, and he banged on the castle gates. And one of the soldiers opened the gates and led him in and showed him to the king. And he said to the king, "King, do you have any work for me?" And the king said, "Well, what can you do?" He said, "I can wash dishes, I can cook food, I can clean, I can do your garden." The king said, "I've already got plenty of help with that. There's only one thing that I need help with." The boy said, "Well, what's that?" And the king said, "I have hares out in the field, and I need somebody to take care of them, and every night herd them in and bring them back to the barn. Have you got any experience at herding hares?" Now the boy had never heard of herding hares before, but he didn't want the king to know this. So he said, "Yeah, of course I have. I've got loads of experience of herding hares. I can do that for you, no problem whatsoever." So the king said, "Super." He said, "Tomorrow you can go out there and you can herd the hares for me. And if you bring them all home, you can marry my daughter, the princess." The boy couldn't quite believe this. He said, "Oh yes, please, I'll be very, very happy with that." And then the king looked down at him, a little bit of menace in his eye. He said, "But if you don't, I will throw you in jail for the rest of your life." Now the boy wasn't very fond of that idea, but he'd already agreed. And he didn't want to show the king that he was afraid, so he agreed. He said, "No problem." So the king showed him up to his room. When he got there, it was a basic bed. There was no supper, and there was no water to drink. And because he hadn't had any more bannock, he was very, very, very hungry. But he was also very exhausted, and he fell asleep straight away. And the next morning he woke with a start. The sun was up, it was a beautiful day. He ran downstairs into the great kitchen, and when he got there, he noticed that the king had eaten all of the porridge and drank all of the tea. There was no food whatsoever, but because he was late, he thought he'd better go out and find the hares. So he ran out of the door and he headed out into the fields, and it didn't take him long until he came to a great big meadow. And in the meadow, there were 24 hares. Big, strong hares. Strong back legs, tall ears, that wise look in their eye. But he also noticed another hare, a small hare with hazel eyes. And this hare was lame. As all the others danced and ran around, this one stayed close to the hedge, unable to run. And the boy sat down, he thought, "Well, this is going to be easy. I'll just sit here all day, and then as the sun goes down, I'll take them back to the barn." But as he sat there, his tummy began to grumble. He thought, "I'm so hungry. I haven't had any supper. I haven't had any breakfast. All I've had for the last 2 days is that tiny little bit of bannock. Oh, if I could just get something to eat," he thought. And he looked around. He spotted the hares. He thought, surely the king won't mind if I just have one of the hares for my breakfast. I'll catch it and I'll cook it up, and then I'll be really strong for the rest of the day. That's what I'll do. So he began to creep through the long grass in the meadow. He had his eye on one hare in particular, a big, strong male. He crept and he crept, and he leapt at the hare, but the hare was way too fast for him. It turned and it ran, and as it ran like magic, it's as if it told all the other hares what had happened, that the boy was trying to capture it to eat it, and the hares scattered far and wide. That is all except the small, lame hare with the beautiful hazel eyes. That hare couldn't run. So the boy advanced on it. He pegged it in the corner. He pounced on it. And he killed the poor little hare. And he cooked it up and he ate it. And then he fell fast asleep. And he woke as the sun was going down and he thought, I need to get back. So he tried to find the hares, but he couldn't find them anywhere. He thought, stupid hares anyway. And he headed back. And he went back to the castle. And when he got there, the king was waiting for him. The king said, where are my hares? And the boy said, well, I tried my best, but the stupid creatures just scattered around. They wouldn't listen to me at all. The king said, what about the small lame one? The one with beautiful hazel eyes? She couldn't have scattered. Where's she? And the boy said, well, because I hadn't got any supper and because you hadn't given me any breakfast, I was very hungry. So I decided to eat that one. And the king's eyes filled with rage. He called for his soldiers. He said, toss him in jail and never, ever let him out again. And that son was never seen again. But back at the cottage with the granite stone walls and the beautiful thatch roof, the next day arrived with a beautiful sunrise. And the younger son came down and said to his mum, Mum, I've been wondering about my brother going off and making his own way in the world, and I think it's time I do that too. And the mother was sad, but she knew that this is the way that things should be. So she handed him the crack pot and the sieve. She said, head down to the brook, and when you get there, bring back as much water as you can, and with that water I will make you a bannock that you can take with you. So the son went down. And as he got there, he looked at the water, and from over his shoulder he heard a sound. It was a bird. The bird said, line it with moss and clog it with clay, and then you can carry the water away. And the boy looked at the bird. He said, what a wonderful idea. I would never have thought of that, little bird. Thank you for your help. Where can I find the moss? And the little bird arrived with moss in its beak. And together they lined the bowl and the sieve with moss, and then they took clay from the riverbank and they clogged it with clay. And the boy filled the sieve and the cracked pot. And he returned to his house with lots of water. His mother was so happy. She said, I can make you a huge bannock with this. So she worked and she made a great big bannock for him. She gave it him. She kissed him on the forehead and she wished him the best of luck. And with that he turned and he headed off. And he walked over the hills and across the fields and through the valleys until he became very tired and weary. And there he sat with his back up against a beautiful beech tree. And he took out a bit of his bannock and he began to eat it. And he heard over his shoulder again the little bird. And the little bird came flying in and said, can I have a little bit of your bannock? And the boy said, of course you can. If it wasn't for your help, I wouldn't have this big bannock. And he handed the bird a crumb. And the bird ate the crumb, and the boy gave the bird more. And the bird said, thank you for this bannock. I'd like to repay you. Would you take one of my feathers so you can make a pipe and play beautiful music? And the boy said, no. I don't need one of your feathers. I don't want to hurt you. And the bird said, no, it really won't hurt me. Please take one of my feathers. So the boy agreed, and he took one of the tail feathers and he pulled it. It didn't hurt the bird at all. And with a small knife, he cut in 2 nicks in the feather to make a lovely pipe to play beautiful music. And with that, he set off walking again until he came to the top of the hill, and down below he saw the great castle. He thought, that is where I will make my fortune. So he went down to the castle and he knocked on the door. It sounds familiar. And the door opened and he was taken to the king, and he said to the king, can I do any work for you? And the king said, yes. What can you do? He said, I can garden, I can cook, I can clean, I can sweep. And the king said, well, I've got enough help for that. What I really need is somebody to herd my hares. Have you got any experience at herding hares? The boy had never heard of this. So he said to the king, well, I haven't got any experience at herding hares, but I'm very good at learning, and I can turn my hand to anything. If you give me a chance, I'll herd your hares. So the king said, okay. He said, tomorrow I'll go out into the fields and take care of them, and at sunset bring them back in. And if you do, you can marry the princess. And the boy said, well, I would only then marry the princess if she wanted to marry me. Of course, it would be up to her as well. And the king said, well, you'll do what you're told. He said, well, okay. The king said, but if you don't bring them back, I will throw you in jail forever. Now, the boy was afraid of this, but he'd agreed, so he wanted to stick to his word. So the king showed him up to his room. It was a basic room with a bed. There was no food. But the boy reached down and he took his bannock. And he ate his bannock and he fell fast asleep. And in the morning he woke up. He went downstairs and the king had eaten all of the porridge and drank all of the tea. But the boy wasn't worried because he had his bannock. So he headed out into the fields. And there he saw all the hares scattered around, 24 of them. And by the hedge, there was a small, lame hare with beautiful hazel eyes. So the boy called to the hares. He said, come on around, hares, come on. But none of the hares would come. And then the little bird appeared. The bird said, try playing the pipe. Maybe they'll react to the pipe. So the boy pulled out the little feather pipe and he began to play. And as he played, the most beautiful music came from the pipe and began to fill the air. And as the music filled the air, something magical happened. It was as if the whole of the natural world stood still to listen. The fish stopped swimming in the river. The birds stopped flying in the sky. The insects stopped scuttling on the floor. All seemed mesmerised by the music. And then the hares began to dance. They jumped up on their back legs and they began to parade around the field through the long grass, hopping and jumping and skipping. And the boy played and played and played, and the day went on and on. And it was the most beautiful of days. All of the natural world mesmerised by this beautiful music, and the hares dancing a jig through this meadow. And as the sun began to set, the boy stopped playing. And as he stopped playing, all the hares came together around his feet. And he said, come on, follow me, it is time to go back to the barn. And all the hares began to follow him. And as he walked, he looked back to check on them, and he noticed that the small hare, the lame one with beautiful hazel eyes, was getting left behind. So he walked back and he picked her up and he put her under his arm, and she was cold, so he took off his jacket and he wrapped her in it. And he walked back. And as he walked back, he put all of the hares into the barn. But he didn't want to leave the lame one. He was afraid that she would be too cold. So he carried her up into his room and he laid her on the bed and covered her with a blanket. And then he went down to see the king. And when he arrived at the king said, where are my hares? And the boy said, they are all safely in the barn. And the king said, even the lame one, the one with beautiful hazel eyes, is she there too? And the boy said, no, she isn't in the barn. I was worried that she would be cold. So I took her up and I've put her in my bed and covered her with the blanket. And the king said, show me. So together they walked up the stone stairway until they arrived at the door. And when they swung the door open, there, lying on the bed, was the princess. with beautiful hazel eyes. The king said, "My son, your kindness and your love have saved my daughter. As I promised before, she is now yours to marry." And the boy looked at the daughter. He said, "Is that okay with you? Is it okay that you and I can get married? That I will be your husband and you will be my wife?" And the princess looked at him and said, "I don't know. I need some time to think." So the boy said, "Okay, while you're thinking, maybe it'd be okay if I can play some music on my feather pipe." And she agreed. And the boy took the feather pipe out and he began to play the pipe. And as he played it, the whole of the castle rose up in joy and in happiness. The soldiers danced, the maids danced, even the king began to dance a jig through the courtyard. And this went on and on through the night. And as the sun came up in the morning, the princess walked over. She put a hand on the boy's shoulder and he took the pipe away from his mouth. And she said, "Yes, I would love for us to be married." And the very next day, the boy and the princess were married. And they lived happily ever after. And that is the story of the laddie who herded hares. So I hope you enjoyed it. It's quite a long story, but some stories need time to evolve, and I think it's definitely worth the time, that one. It's a lovely tale about kindness. I also think it's a lovely tale about listening to nature and to our intuition, and sometimes letting nature guide us and trusting that everything will be okay. So I hope you enjoyed it. Many, many more stories over at Weeby Kids. Head over there, weebykids.net. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.